My name is Aaron Blaise, and I'm currently a jack of all trades, basically. I'm an animator, I'm a traditional artist, I teach, and that's kind of what fills my time nowadays. It's really funny. My journey to animation is kind of different than a lot of guys. I never wanted to be an animator. I never thought about it. I grew up wanting to be a wildlife artist and an illustrator for National Geographic. When I was a little kid, I grew up in this little trailer out in the Everglades in South Florida, and I used to chase all these animals all around and always had my sketchbooks, and I was taking pictures and drawing animals, and I've always been interested in animals and animal art. And my heroes were people like Robert Bateman and Guy Koliak, a lot of these incredible wildlife artists. And so I went to Ringling College of Art and Design and majored in illustration with the intent of being a painter and an illustrator for National Geographic. I found out early on that National Geographic, they freelance everything. And I didn't want to freelance anymore. I wanted to be on staff, So I started thinking about different options. And it was interesting. There was two companies that were coming to Ringling to interview. One was Hallmark Cards, and the other one was Disney. And Disney had just kind of started this new program where they wanted to see if they could go outside of animation schools and bring people in that could draw and teach them animation. And so lucky for me, Disney was first as far as between that and Hallmark Cards. And I put together a portfolio. They picked 8 of us from across the country. I was 19 years old, and I still wasn't sure if I wanted to animate or not. But lucky for me, I was brought in and I was paired up with Glen Keane. He became my mentor, my teacher. Within 10 minutes of sitting with Glen and listening to his passion and what animation brings and to an artist, to be an artist animating, within 10 minutes I knew that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, and that was 30 years ago. So here I am. Having not come from the animation world, I didn't know who Glen was. A couple of guys in my group were from Cal Arts, and they saw that I was with Glen Keane, and they're like, "Oh my God, you know who this is?" And I said, "No." And so I went in just thinking he was another guy that drew really well. And then I realized once again, about 10 minutes, no, there's more to this guy than meets the eye. And I remember sitting with him and just being in such awe of not only his drawing ability and his animating ability, but just him as a person and his passion, his kindness, his generosity. I've known Glenn for over 30 years now, and I still take every opportunity I can, if someone's listening, to tell them how amazing this man is. I was in Florida working. We had a studio in Florida along with a studio in California when we were making Beauty and the Beast, and so he wanted me to be the Florida Beast guy, he told me. And he gave me one of the best sequences I've ever had because he knew it would help me grow. And it was a sequence where Belle and the Beast, she's trying to bandage his arm. He's just been beaten up by the wolves, and they get into this big argument. That hurt, and they go back and forth. And it was the biggest, juiciest bit of acting that I'd ever had before. And it was well above my abilities. But he gave it to me because he knew I would grow out of it. And out of that, I was given other roles because of that piece of animation. It's all because of Glenn. I came into animation, I think, at a really very lucky time. 1988 is when I interned. And then I started at the studio in Orlando in April 17th of 1989. Oliver and Company was the last film that had been made by the time I came into the studio. As a matter of fact, when I was interning, they were making Oliver and Company. And so all the big classics that have come since then, hadn't been made yet. And so animation it wasn't on the map that much. The Little Mermaid came out, and then Rescuers Down Under, and then I worked on Beauty and the Beast, and then we did Aladdin, and then we did The Lion King, and then Pocahontas and Mulan, and all these, for me, these were the films that I hit. And then after Mulan, I was given the opportunity to direct Brother Bear, and especially in the early 90s, we're all in our early 20s, and we didn't know that we were making these huge blockbusters out there. We just were wanting to create something beautiful, and we have a good time doing it. I mean, it was a madhouse a lot of times in there, and I mean a madhouse from a fun point of view. I mean, we'd have rubber band wars, and we'd practical jokes on each other all the time. It was like being in college again. But we were making these big blockbuster movies. And so the movies started coming out, Beauty and the Beast came out, and it was a huge hit. It was nominated for an Oscar, not Best Animated Feature, Best Picture, and that was, we couldn't believe it. And then, then we hit Aladdin, then we hit, The Lion King, which was just exploded. And we couldn't believe what was happening and to be part of that. And here we are 25 years later, and those films are still iconic. That still blows my mind. I was in China last year teaching and talking to these young kids that were 6, 7, 8 years old. They've all seen Beauty and the Beast. They've all seen The Lion King. They all know, and those movies were made 20 years before they were born. And it blows my mind. And so, you ask, what was it like to work on them? During the time, it was a lot of fun, but I think it's more, I get more nostalgic about it now, just realizing that, this is something that we did so long ago, but it's still such a integral part of our society. It's so embedded. Every kid's seen these movies, it's part of childhood. And I can't tell you how many people, in the last 5 years I've sat down with to teach that have said, your film or this film was part of my childhood. I grew up on that film, and that just warms my heart. I think it's amazing. That's another thing, that it's multi-generational. We're getting to that point now. And so my kids were young growing up during the 90s. My daughter was born in 89. My son was born in 1990. And so now it's going on to their generation, my grandkids, the next generation, and they're growing up on it as well. And it's funny, my daughter was 2 when I was making The Lion King. When I was working on The Lion King, I wasn't making The Lion King when I was working on it. And she was a big influence in my design of Nala. I did young Nala. And so as I was designing the character, my daughter had these big, doughy eyes, and I put them in the character. She was kind of this big influence. And it's funny, here we are, 25 years later, she's 30 years old. She still tells everybody she's Nala. It's really cute. So it's really nice that it's such a part of our lives. It's really cool. I get that question a lot, do I have a favorite project? And my favorite project is whatever project I'm working on at the time. It really is. Now, I do have reasons why I love each project. And there are projects that stick out for me. Beauty and the Beast, I was just talking about the sequence where Beast is being bandaged and they get into this argument. That, to me, that sequence is my favorite sequence I've ever animated because of all the doors it opened for me and the amount of learning that I went through in creating that sequence. I remember when Glen gave me the sequence, the first thing I did was sit down and start thumbnailing, figuring out all the choreography that was going to happen. But I did it in Los Angeles. I flew to Los Angeles to sit with Glen, and for 3 weeks, that's all I did was plan out the sequence. Never did any animation while I was there. And then I flew back to Florida, sat down. Mark Henn was animating Belle in that sequence, and I was animating Beast, and we just set to work. And so it took 3 months to do this 1.5 minutes of animation. Aladdin was the first time that I had my own character, where I did Raja the tiger. It was a small role, but it was a big deal for me. And I got to do an animal, which was great. And that role led to me being able to do Nala in The Lion King. And so that, I love the film. I love African wildlife. I've been to Africa twice. I'm going again in October. Anytime I get to do anything African, I love. So that was a huge deal. And then, in Mulan, I had multiple characters, which was great. Mulan was a funny story because I was actually cast to do the villain. Now, the villain is the Shan Yu, but at the time I was cast, the villain was a character named Balgung, and he got written out of the picture after everybody was cast, and so I was left without a character. And as a result of that, I ended up getting several different characters that were kind of smaller roles, but I had this, huge diversity in the film. I did all the ghosts and this character named Yao that likes to fight all the time. And then from there, I went on to, the most difficult project I've ever done was Brother Bear, because I co-directed it. The way I became involved with the project, we had just finished Mulan, or we were finishing Mulan. We had what we call the State of the Union kind of address from the heads of the studio. We do this once a year where they would get on a video conference, and we had a studio in Paris, we had a studio in Florida, and we had the studio in Los Angeles. And so they would do this big video conference and say, hey, this is what's going on in the studio. They were talking about what's in development. And they said, yeah, we've got this one project. It's really just kind of sitting on the shelf. No one's working on it right now, but it's called Bears. And my ears went, I was like, what? Bears. And I just finished this big oil painting of this bear. And the idea of drawing bears and animating bears in some form or fashion, it was just, I couldn't resist. And so I remember them talking about other stuff in that State of the Union, but all I remember is being focused on this idea of bears and working on it. So I started contacting Tom Schumacher, who was the head of the studio at the time, and saying, hey, I really want to be involved in this project in some way, art directed or character design. And we went back and forth quite a bit until finally he came to me and he said, well, have you ever thought about directing? And you could have blew me over with a leaf. I mean, first of all, I'd never thought about directing. I didn't think that was my path. But the more I thought about it, the idea of being able to help create, such a big project was really enticing, But it was funny because a lot of the projects that I had worked on up to that point, the first director, more often than not, was fired, let go, and they bring another director on. It's like, I don't want to be the first director. And so there is that. But I remember going home and talking to my wife and talking to my father and talking to them about these concerns. Like, I can stay, an animator and everything will be fine, safe, but I have this opportunity to possibly direct a movie. And I remember my father saying, you're right. You will be safe, but 20 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, you're going to be going, what if, And so I went ahead and said, yeah, I'd like to do it. And like I said earlier, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I really jumped from the frying pan into the fire. It was extremely difficult in the beginning, trying to write a story, a movie, and understand the structure and understand character arcs and everything else. Like I said, I had animated on and been a part of, 7 feature films up to that point and thought I knew how to make a movie, but I didn't know how to make a story. It took us 6 years to make Brother Bear, and I always call it my 6-year filmmaking school. After I was done with it, and then I was ready to make a movie. But I think it came out great. And, for me, it was nice to be able to bring something to the table in such a big way, as far as what kind of story we're going to tell. They had already had some scripts that they had started to work on, and they were more in the vein of like a Robin Hood, where they were anthropomorphic animals. But I wanted to do something a little more on the Lion King side of things. And so I remember sitting with Tom Schumacher and asking, hey, can I basically start over, throw everything out, and just start from the idea of making a movie with bears? And so that's what we did. And I was a big fan of Native American myths and legends and that sort of thing. And I wanted to tell our own legend, our own myth. So that's where it came from. We did a ton of research. And then I remember sitting down with Chuck Williams, who was our producer, and just talking about things that inspired us. And I remember we were talking about Harry Chapin's Cats in the Cradle. And it's a song about a father who regrets not having spent time with his son as he grew up, and he realized now his son's grown up and he's lost all that time. I thought, man, that's such an emotional story. And we started writing Brother Bear around that emotion. And it evolved and changed, through time. But that was the first initial seed of the idea for Brother Bear. It was really kind of cool. So hand-drawn animation, I always tell everybody, animation is not the art of moving things. Animation is the art of bringing something to life. My first love is drawing. I love to draw more than painting, more than anything else. Just the act of drawing. And to see that I could, through this simple tool, not a computer, just a bunch of paper and a pencil, I could sit down and create life. I can make people cry. I can make people laugh. To me, it's like Frankenstein. It's like I'm breathing, life into inanimate objects. It's just a piece of paper with marks on it. But all of a sudden, you flip those things and you've done something magical. And to me, that's what it was. It's magic. And once I broke the code, and understood how to do that, then it's intoxicating. You can't not do it. And so that's what animation did for me. It took what I knew of drawing and elevated it 1,000 times. It's just magic for me. I love travel. I love people. I love the world we live in. And I'm constantly inspired no matter where I go. I love the natural world, obviously. But I really love, in all the travels that I do, my favorite thing is to get out and meet people, to see how different we are and how much we are the same. And getting that into the animation, whether I'm animating an animal or not, it doesn't matter. It's getting those characters, it's getting that emotion, it's getting, like I said, the similarities and the differences all on, in the story or in the shot that I might be animating. That to me is what I think Disney and Pixar and DreamWorks, they do so well, is creating characters that are believable, characters that you can get behind and root for. And that all comes from, I think, being a student of the world, taking all this kind of stuff in and all of our differences and similarities, like I was saying, and all those types of things, and then kind of boiling it down in your mind and regurgitating it into something that we can all relate to, on the screen. And so that's what inspires me. A lot of people, I think, will explain animation as doing multiple drawings that move. And to me, it's doing multiple drawings that bring a character to life. So sometimes a character doesn't move at all. Sometimes it's an expression, a little shift of an eye or something like that. But hand-drawn animation is literally the act of sitting down with a pencil or a pen with a stack of paper, and you start with that first piece of paper, boom, lay it down, and you start with that idea that you have, that emotion, that acting that you have that you want to get out, and you just start putting it down one drawing at a time, one frame at a time, 1/24th of a second at a time until it's done. I made the shift to working digitally long before I started doing it with animation. I started doing my illustration work and design work digitally about 12 years ago, 13 years ago. And I've always been working on a Cintiq, which makes it much easier, where I can sit and, I've got a drawing tablet that I can draw right on the screen rather than, sitting down here and looking at the screen, which always felt disjointed to me. So I had that advantage. And so when I sat down, I started working with TV Paint software. I remember installing it, sitting down and animating, and I animated a shot that day. I hate to admit this, but I've actually become more of a digital animation, hand-drawn animation convert because of the ability to get it out so quickly and tell a story with so much ease, and it just makes the process so much easier. Now, from an art standpoint, I do miss and I love having a stack of paper that I can flip through and physical drawings, and I do go back and do that, every once in a while. But for getting out a story, and wanting to get it out quick, then I much prefer working digitally. It's just much easier. For me, when I'm animating, I'm into the shot that I'm animating. That's what I'm thinking about. Until I get it all down, and then I kind of go on autopilot and I'm tying drawings down and adding in-betweens and all that. But when I'm in the moment trying to figure out this shot, whether it's an emotion or comedy or whatever it might be, all I can think about is I immerse myself. Time goes away, everything goes away, and I immerse myself in that world. The characters become real for me. I put myself in that character's head, and I've been known to cry, I've been known to laugh, I've been known, to get so deeply into a character, to feel an emotion and get that down on paper. And it's exhausting. And often I try to get it down as fast as I can because I don't want, it's fleeting, I'll scribble out, that emotion, whatever it is, that the acting that I'm trying to get done. And then once I get that first scribble pass to a place that I think is communicating what it is that I want to communicate, then, like I said, I kind of go on autopilot. That's when I can turn my music on and just relax and just start to draw and draw, and then really kind of pull everything together and tie it down and just, do that. So that's where my mind is. The evolution of hand-drawn animation, I think there's the way the stories are told, I think has changed from the standpoint. I mean, Disney's done musicals and that sort of thing all through, the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all through the century. The way we started doing them as like Broadway musicals in the 90s was different. It was different than when Walt was making films. And that to me was interesting. But when you talk about the fundamentals of animation, the squash, the stretch, the appeal, the entertainment, the acting, I think the storytelling has changed. And so what I mean by that is when you look at what Walt, the style of storytelling through, from the 40s up into the 60s, and in the 70s as well, before Michael Eisner, basically. That was its own style. And it was diverse. I mean, you had everything from Pinocchio and Snow White to, Sleeping Beauty. I mean, everything in between. But I think in the 90s, when we had Tom Schumacher come in, when we had a lot of executives that came in that had a theatrical background. And then things started to change. It became more Broadway. And it really struck a chord with the audiences. That I think was really, and plus I think we went back to just really good, solid storytelling. And so I think all of that, combined really set a new standard for hand-drawn animation in the 90s. But when you talk about squash and stretch and appeal and, all the fundamentals of animation, just good acting, that's never changed. I know I was always I was striving to, animate like Milt Kahl or, Ollie Johnson, Frank Thomas, these guys were my heroes. And to be able to have the amount of appeal and just technical skill that they had, that was always my goal, to try to achieve that. Matter of fact, I've got a Milt Kahl drawing right there that sits on my shelf that I'm always looking at, for inspiration. So those guys really set the standard. So that's never changed, and I don't think it ever will. So I think stylistically, in the way we tell our stories, that's going to change and evolve and morph. The visuals might change, but I think good full animation will never change. My last years at Disney, for lack of a better way of explaining it, were pretty tragic. Going back to 2004, Disney decided to shut down the Orlando studio, and we were a studio of about 360 people, and everyone was laid off except about 10 of us. And for me, I wasn't even let go. I was held on to, but to see all my friends and everybody go away was really hard. We all grew up together and made these films together. So anyway, I transferred to Los Angeles, my wife Karen and my two kids, Austin and Dustin, and we started over again and started making a new movie after Brother Bear. But during that time, Karen was diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer. And so we were trying to make a film called The King of the Elves. And during the process of making that, she, the treatments weren't working and she was getting sicker and sicker. And ultimately we started making the film at my home. We were writing it there so I could take care of her. Disney was great in letting us do that and helping us set up and that sort of thing. We're doing all of our storyboarding right in my studio. But ultimately, on March 11th of 2007, we were all there and she passed away in my arms. And when that happened, I was just completely devastated. I lost my mojo. I didn't care about animation. I didn't care about art. I didn't care about anything. I was heartbroken. My kids were a mess. I always explain that, there were two things that really were my identity. One was my job at Disney, and then the other one was my family. My family was completely torn apart, and Disney was starting to fall apart because I really didn't know what I was going to do. And I remember going back and trying to work on the film a few weeks afterwards, and I was just hollow. And I tried to work on the film for about 2 years, and I just couldn't get it to work. And I was spending a lot of time in bars and things like that. And then eventually, John Lasseter and Ed Catmull, they took me aside and they said, "Hey, we're taking you off the movie." And that's when I realized I needed to make a change. I'd fallen a long way. And they said, "Hey, we don't want you to leave. We're not firing you. We want, we love your art. We want, maybe you can go into visual development, but your directing days are over." And I'd already tasted directing. I loved it. And I loved, storytelling. I didn't know if I was going to ever go back to it, but I knew I needed to make a change and just completely reinvent myself. And so I said, "No, I think I quit." After 21 years, in that instant, I said, "I quit." And they went, "What? No. And I said, "No," I explained. I said, I've been struggling for 2 years. I've got to start over. I've got to find myself. I want to go home. I want to go back to Florida. And so I remember going home and sitting on my bed and just panicking because I was like, what did I just do? I've got a mortgage. I got this house. But I ended up selling the house. I actually went to work the next day, and I was cleaning out my office, and there was a job offer on my computer, or job opportunity. It wasn't an offer yet, in Florida at this studio that was just starting to come together, and they wanted a director. So I interviewed, and I got the job, sold my house, packed everything up, came back to Florida, and started at this studio called Tradition Studios for Digital Domain down in South Florida. And I was living a dream. I was, starting over back in my home state, living on the water where I'd got my start, and everything was wonderful. And we were making a new film called The Legend of Tembo about this elephant. So I was making a movie that I loved, and 3 years into it, the studio went bankrupt. And all of a sudden I was without a job again. And so at that point, I said, okay, I'm really going to start over. I don't want to depend on executives making decisions for me. If I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail because of me. If I'm going to succeed, I'm going to succeed for me. And then I started thinking about Glen Keane, and the way that he had always shared and inspired. And I started thinking about the 25 years at that point of experience that I had. And then I started thinking about, the ability to share those, on the internet through YouTube and all these different things. And I wanted to do something that would make my wife proud. And so I just kind of started thinking, I can create lessons. I can teach. And that's where the seed started. I remember drinking my coffee, and that's where it all came to me. And I got together with a friend of mine, Nick Birch, who I just met him like the year before. He was a teacher at Ringling, and he had brought me in to speak. And I said, hey, can you do my website for me? And he did. And then we just continued to talk about, creating courses. And then within a year, he became my business partner. And it's grown into this wonderful thing for us where I get to share, my experiences and my, the knowledge that I've been able to pick up over the years, and see a new generation take it and run with it. And that to me is super inspiring. From a creative standpoint, I'm happier now than I've ever been. And the tragic irony of that is that it took the death of my wife to send me down a path that I never would have gone otherwise. That brought me back to a place now where I'm happier than I've ever been. I'm in love again, and I'm animating now, and everything's great. But it's interesting the paths that your life takes you in, to end up where you are ultimately. So that's how Creature Art Teacher came about, through this big tragic event. I still don't see myself as strictly an animator. I've never seen myself as an animator. I've seen myself as an artist. I love animation, but to me, that's just another medium. I love to paint. I love to draw. I still do all of that, and I've been doing it since I was 18, or 17, and what's nice about that is I'm not just teaching animation. I'm teaching animation. I'm teaching character design. I'm teaching drawing. I'm teaching digital painting. I'm teaching all these different things. So it's people that are being, they're all different disciplines. And that's really cool to see. The stuff that I'm teaching in my animation courses, it's all, it's fundamentals. It's stuff that every animator should be thinking about. But it's nice to see them again. It's always nice to have that as a reminder. Me, having done it for 30 years, I still get inspired by other animators and learn. I'm constantly learning. And I think that's what makes us artists. I think artists at heart want knowledge. They want to soak things up. They want to express themselves in new and interesting ways. And so I'm always trying to find that and perfect it. So Snow Bear, the inspiration behind Snow Bear really came down to me. At heart, I'm still a filmmaker and an animator, along with being another artist. I want to get back into animation, but I also want to do something that was something that we could handle on a small scale. Most of my ideas come to me either driving or in the shower, or early in the morning when I'm like half awake. And so I remember taking a shower and trying to think about, okay, what do I want to animate? I need to do something that's easy enough for me to do the whole thing, along with maybe 2 or 3 other people. So I want it to be one character. So where can I tell a story with one character? I started thinking about, the Arctic, and how simple I can make the backgrounds and graphic and this polar bear, and started thinking about, how lonely he might be up there. And so, I want to tell this story about one character. Let's make this, this lonely polar bear in the Arctic that can't find any friends. And so as a result of not being able to find any friends, he decides to make a friend. Literally, he makes a snow bear. And it just evolved from there. And it's grown into this really fun story that I've got Lyndon Ruddy, who a good friend of mine, who's a storyboard artist at Blue Sky. I can storyboard, but I can't storyboard nearly as well as Lyndon. Lyndon's just brilliant. And so we brought him in and asked him to board it. We got together, talked out, put out the entire structure and the story and everything else. And then he's gone away and he's boarded it for us. And it's just absolutely beautiful. And it really is, it's the story of this guy that he's lonely and makes a snow bear. And it's funny, you never see the snow bear move, but He's always in different positions, you know, whether they're playing hide and seek or they're having dinner together. And there's a few twists and turns in the story that happen that I don't want to give away yet. It's really sweet. And that's something else I wanted. I wanted, you know, I'm a big sap, you know, at heart. I like to cry at movies and I like to tell emotional stories. And this one's pretty emotional. You know, like I said, it's about being lonely and finding someone to take that loneliness away. Everything that I do comes from a place that I've experienced before. And so whether it's comedy, whether it's drama, it's something I try to find something in it that I've experienced. I've had a pretty diverse life. And so I think I have a pretty good pool to pull from. And yeah, and so, you know, this loneliness, I go into, you know, the emotions of when Karen first passed away and feeling those emotions. Or later on, I remember before Vedanta and I, you know, got together, I kind of resigned myself that I was going to be a bachelor for the rest of my life. And I just like, okay, this is just how it's going to be. And then all of a sudden, you know, love hits you right in the face when you least expect it. And that's kind of what I wanted this to show here is when, you know, right when you least expect it, something drops under your lap. And so I take those experiences and I try to write them in a way that feels universal so that everyone can say, oh yeah, I know that feeling, you know. So that's where the inspiration comes from. So this desk, I've had this desk for over 25 years, and it was my desk at Disney. And this desk has a lot of history on it. I animated the Beast from Beauty and the Beast on this desk. I animated Raja from Aladdin on this desk. I animated all my characters from Mulan, uh, Nala from The Lion King. As a matter of fact, there's a little scratch board right here, a little image that I carved into my desk, and it's a lion's head that I kind of scratched away. And I did that the day that I started on The Lion King. I feel very, very connected to this desk. You know, it's got a lot of soul. And it's funny. I mean, it's used probably more often for me to do watercolors and that sort of thing. But I do feel the need every once in a while to sit down and hammer out some paper hand-drawn animation. This was something that I was doing as a YouTube video to show how a character might do a take. And so this is a little cat character that I put together. And so here, the character is kind of sad in the beginning. Or not kind of sad, he is sad. And he looks up, something gets his attention. Huh? He looks up, and then he has this big change. And he goes, he squashes. Whoa, and he looks up really quick, really happy. And he settles in. Something changes his mind, and he's super happy. So it's this change of emotion. He looks up kind of slowly, inquisitively out of that sad pose, and then does this squash and looks up really quick, and you can see how we stretch the drawings, and he pops into this happy pose at the end. So very, very simple, but effective, and something that I was trying to I thought it was a lot more fun to do it on paper, do this lesson, than to do it digitally. And so I've just kept it. And this just kind of sits on my pegboard until I animate something else. I always put it aside and then I animate other things. But I've got, you know, even for something like this, you know, for something that simple, I'll still sit down and I do my thumbnails to plan the whole thing out. That's a very integral part of my process, you know, in my planning is sitting down and you know, working out what those poses, what those expressions are going to be first, and then I sit down and I animate it. So it's basically working, you know, it's coming up with the plans before you build the house. That's what doing your thumbnails do for animation. And these are some other ones here. This is a little piece that I did where I have a character coming towards camera. Once again, it's, you know, the thumbnails where this guy is getting angry and he yells and like fills the screen. And so that's some more animation there, just some more thumbnails. But like I said, this desk, it's got so much history in it. It's dirty, it's banged up, it's scratched, it's a mess, but every scratch gives it a little bit more soul. And I love this desk. I'll never get rid of it. This will be in my family forever. And so it's wonderful. I keep my sketchbooks up here. There's one that I kept on my last trip to Africa. So these are little notes and little sketches, paintings that I did while I was out on the Masai Mara in Kenya. We even got a little bit of Masai Mara grass in there. But I keep all these things within reach, so in case sometimes I like to go through my old sketchbooks and just kind of, I write about what I did that day, and it's nice to go back and have a little walk down memory lane. So I keep little sketchbooks like that all really close. I've got sketchbooks all over the place, hundreds of them. Like I'm drawing a little shot of Snow Bear right now. He's looking up, and there's a shot where he sees the snow bear. He's come back up over a ridge, and he sees the snow bear off in the distance that he's made, and it makes him happy. And so in this shot, he's a little bit sad because he hasn't been able to find the bear that he made. And so I want to feel that emotion. And so here I'm just thinking about, I don't want to be super over the top. So I take a lot of time on the eyes. I want those eyes to really read that emotion. And a lot of times that first drawing, this is the first drawing, I'll sit and I'll work it, trying to get a sense of that character. I'm thinking about the anatomy. I'm thinking about making sure I have the perspective right on the the bear itself. Are the eyes lining up with the nose, and to make it an appealing drawing. And the appeal itself, I'm thinking about that. Does it have enough appeal? Is it something that the audience will fall for? So here he is. He's sitting down like this and looking around. And then I want to get that last pose. So that last pose is him kind of up here. And you'll see I always start with these circular shapes, simple shapes. And I know for instance, polar bears, they've got a very shallow, straight head. They don't have much of a forehead. And so here it gets a little difficult to get that right and still get the expression right, because I don't, the eyes are set kind of weird. So I want to make sure I've got that. I like to give them a little bit of an overbite. Just makes them a little bit more appealing. It makes them a little goofy, but in a really kind of sweet way. It's really individual as far as the tastes go. I tend to fall on a more realistic side, but there's a cartooniness in there. Even when I'm doing my realistic animals paintings and that sort of thing, they tend to have I push the character in them a little bit. And so to me, it really comes down to eyes, making sure that your eyes are really expressive. And so no matter where you are as far as the realism goes, as long as you have those expressive eyes, and it really depends obviously on what's the art direction that you're going for. And obviously you don't want to go too realistic if you're doing something that should be broader and more cartoony. And I love drawing, just on a side note, I love drawing with these big pieces of graphite, because I don't, especially in the beginning, I don't like a lot of detail, and it enables me to kind of draw with a thick line, although this one's, I haven't worn it down enough to be really thick, but I like drawing with that really thick line. So here you'll see I'll spend a little extra time on the eyes because I really want them to be expressive. And even things like his ears are going to perk up. A polar bear, the ears are set way back and they're small. Those ears will boop, perks right up. They've got this really long neck. hello. I'll get him to talk every once in a while. If you sneak up on me and watch me, you'll see me talking to myself and making the noises that the character might be making. I really get into the character quite a bit. But like I was saying earlier, there's something about being able to sit down with a pencil and paper and just create this life. I'll throw a little in between in here. I want a nice kind of arcing movement. So he's going to come forward a little bit as he comes up. So right now you'll see the way I'm flipping them. I'm doing an in-between drawing. Maybe drag those cheeks a little bit. I'm going to bring that neck around just a slightly different way so it fits within the arc a little better. There we go. I always start with these circles because I can keep them the same size, because then I can just build the features right onto the circle. A lot of people ask me, you know, how is it that you draw the character the same way over and over, and how do different animators draw the character the same way each time? And this is how we do it. We construct our characters the same way from simple shapes. So I'll go in and I'll just very quickly jot these, especially the in-betweens, jot these expressions down. And here I might even have him kind of drag a little bit on his mouth. There we go. I want to make sure that everything's in the right perspective. Like here, I feel like I'm drawing the chin, the arc is just a little bit off. When I flip back and forth, I want it to feel like it's fitting into here, which tells me I want this chin to flow back just a little bit differently. There, that one feels a little better to me. You know what? I used to change pencils all the time, just so I didn't get used to, you know, any specific one. But I realize now that was kind of a mistake, because, you know, once I got used to one, I animated a little quicker because I wasn't getting used to the pencil. I didn't have to get used to it. I was already used to it. And so for me, I like working with a big piece of graphite like this. This is a Faber-Castell. And the reason being is I can sharpen it into a point, or I can, you know, wear it down into something that's really blunt, and I don't get caught up in details. That was something I picked up from Glen Keane. He would draw. He had these pencils called Blaisdells, and they were this. It looked like a charcoal pencil, but instead of charcoal, it had graphite in it, and there were these beautiful pencils. They don't make them anymore, but there are these beautiful pencils that, you know, you could draw really big, bold drawings with them, and they worked great. So I'll keep things really scribbly like here. So here you have them coming up. What? Huh? just have them settle in. We'll just do a couple of drawings here. I have them just settle in. Here, I might even drag his features a little bit. There we go. Get that nose to pop right into place. And here I'm going to drag that mouth just a little bit as he pops up into place. These in-between drawings can sometimes look really funny, but when you play them at speed, the way they connect our key drawings together is really what's important. So here I have his eye dragging a little bit. It's really popping up into place. And push that eyebrow up just a little higher. There we go. Let's get these nostrils in. Drag those jowls on the cheeks. This kind of stuff is always a lot of fun, doing those drag drawings. A lot of times, like with really broad animation, you can get away with super, broad wipes and distortion to the character. Pops right up into place. Hello. Big smile. Actually, other things you can do, I might even come back in here. A lot of times I'll make changes on the fly like this. I'll go, you know what? Rather than just keeping his eyes open, maybe he comes up and we throw a little blink in there, give it a little life. So I'll do that instead. Yeah, as he's changing his expression, throws in a little blink. And we just do a lot more drawings. We fill it in with in-betweens and smooth out the action, and we've got a little shot. But for me, these are the most important drawings right here, establishing these key drawings and breakdowns. And then once they're there, then I can sit back and just kind of relax and put it on autopilot and just draw away. That's how I approach my animation. A little bit of Snow Bear.